Hey, welcome to the Fireside. Hey, let's listen to some of that Delta blues. What do you think? Hey, everybody. My name is Jake. Welcome back to the Fireside, or welcome to the Fireside if this is your first time. My goal here is to help you become a better problem solver, a better tattooer, a better picture drawer, as well as help myself to do those things. What you are about to watch here today is actually a pre-recorded technique talk, and this is something that we do in the Inside Fireside Tattoo Club. If you're not familiar with our club, it's a group of tattooers who are really driven to grow their own skill sets and to help each other. And one of the great things that we do in the club is we bring in artists from outside of the club to do technique talks. It's essentially a Zoom conversation with everyone in the club kind of sitting around, asking questions, sharing ideas. And the difference between a technique talk and our typical podcast is a lot of times we'll go a little deeper into the weeds since it's all professional tattooers in the group. So the presenters a lot of times will go a little deeper into their working process, a lot of technical stuff that they may or may not go through on a regular YouTube video, a podcast. And today we have one of our very favorite presenters. His name is Patrick Paul O'Neill, the Burning Jewel on Instagram. I'll make sure to link to him. He is a fantastic tattooer. Not only that, he's great at explaining his processes. He's very thoughtful, great at kind of thinking out loud, thinking through his processes and generating ideas and really stimulating great discussions. And for that reason, we really love having him on. Now, a quick disclaimer, if you are listening to this episode and not watching it, it's fine. You'll probably get 50-60% of the content, but this one is one that I would recommend either watching on our website or on YouTube because there's a lot of kind of visual information that you'll need to see to fully grasp what we're talking about. Finally, before we get rolling, I want to thank our newest, latest, greatest sponsor, Tattoo Trunk. Tattoo Trunk is super cool. I had not heard of them, and I met them at a recent tattoo convention. And essentially what they're doing is they've created this modular kind of portable tattoo station, this kit, where you could definitely set it up at your home station. It's these modular pieces that click together. You can custom build it where it'll hold different sizes of inks, your bibs, drawers for machines and cartridges, things like that, water cup kind of holders that'll keep those things stable. And the cool thing about it is it all collapses together and goes in this custom backpack that you can take with you. You can hop on a plane and set up at a convention literally in a couple of minutes or at a guest spot. So literally you just open the backpack, pull the handful of modular items out, stack them and snap them together in the way that you like them to be set up, and then you're ready to go. They sent me one a while back, and I'll have to say it's very durable, very well made. I won't say indestructible, but would be very hard to break. And the great thing is, if you want to use the code FIRESIDE at checkout, you'll get 10% off of your order. I want to thank Tattoo Trunk for making today's episode possible. Give them a shout. You can support us by supporting Tattoo Trunk and then also supporting yourself. It's a win-win-win situation, you know. So let's go ahead and get to the episode. Thank you guys for supporting us, and I'll see you at the end.
With your designs, are they typically story-based, and do they have a narrative most of the time?
That's a great question. Yes, that they do. So typically, like the aspect of introducing like narrative elements is going to be coming through during the consultation process. So I'd say about 3/4 of the time, my client is going to kind of have something in mind, or whether it's a subject or a theme. And at that point, you're really just kind of assessing the who, what, when, why, where of the project. But some clients I'll find who are a little bit more open-minded or a little bit more flexible in terms of a subject or narrative. I actually typically like to use that as an opportunity to get to know them really well, because someone might tell me I want like a monkey king fighting a tiger, and I'll often ask like the client a secondary set of questions like, well, why is it you want a tiger? Like, why is it you want a monkey king? Beyond perhaps just saying it looks cool. And let's dive a little bit deeper, because I found if they're urged to think about it a little bit more deeply, new themes or new opportunities to inject narrative into the piece are going to come that way. And then it's my job as someone that's doing a lot of research to to suggest appropriate themes to which then the client can kind of choose from. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Sorry, I was muted. Kurt has his hand raised.
Yeah, thanks for your time, sir. Just as a follow-up to that, when you are urging clients to think more, which I find myself doing as well, I usually have like initial discussion. Do you find yourself sending them home with things to think about to then consult again? Or do you tend to find yourself brainstorming and then try storming in the consultation with the client?
Oh, great question. So just to recap, if I understood your question correctly, you're asking, am I sending them home with some questions to then reconsider? Or are we trying to find all the answers during the consultation?
Yeah, correct. Very succinct way to put it. Yeah, is this a together thing or homework and reconnect?
Okay, so I would say, and by the way, is my whole screen showing? I just want to make sure about that first.
Yes, it's showing. It's showing you're on the share screen right now, but earlier
All
it was
right.
showing your appropriate.
Excellent. All right, guys, this is going to go as smooth as butter. So to address your question now, typically in my consultations, they're pretty long. They're about an hour long, because there's so many different factors in terms of like, getting your client like comfortable and really settled in and ready to open up and not feel as if this is like a sales transaction, if that makes any sense. And there's going to be some brainstorming during the consultation, alternative possibilities as for whatever subject that they're looking for. But I would say a really great consultation is not only about answering their questions, it's actually giving them further questions to then consider. So often it will be, let me hear your ideas, here are my suggestions, as well as here are some alternative options. And then after that point, introduce, these broader questions, and then it's their responsibility to go kind of consider these things. So then typically there's going to be a follow-up along with their reference photos, which will kind of clearly define everything. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, very much so. If I'm understanding it correctly, because it does sound similar to what I do when when you're in that follow up with like sending reference pictures, that's just like through email or something like that, because you've got the base of what you want to talk about, right? I assume in a certain circumstance you might bring them back in, but for the most part, it's like, hey, go home, think about it more, and then send me your thoughts. Correct?
Yes.
Awesome,
Yes.
dude. Thank you so much for your time. That's awesome.
Yes.
Thank you.
One thing,
No problem.
real quickly, that I found helps me a lot in that consultation process, and mine probably isn't as thorough as Patrick's. I'm just not as thorough in general, I think, as he is. But I tell everyone, hey, so right now, I make a Dropbox folder in front of them, and then I say, anything that you come across, between now and 3 months from now, when it's your tattoo appointment, feel free to shoot it over and we'll drop it into your folder. And it doesn't have to be I even stress, like, I'd rather it not be a tattoo, but if you just like, you love the color of this, you love the expression of this, you love the positioning of this, like, let's just make a little like board, a little Pinterest board kind of thing, but in Dropbox. And then that gives them the idea of I think to me, it gives them like the freedom, or it takes the weight off of their shoulders where they're like, don't walk out and be like, oh shit, I forgot to tell him this, or I forgot to say that, or whatever it is. They get to like, they have months to just like scroll, and anytime they come across anything, screenshot it and just drop it over. And then I just feel like, to me, it makes, it helps me to get a better idea of what they're kind of looking for. And if it starts to really go off the rails, then I can respond and be like, hey, what's that last thing that we added to the Dropbox folder? What does that have to do with anything that we've discussed? And so it kind of extends that consultation for weeks or months on end. And by the end of it, I have a really solid idea and a ton of great reference. So
where my process would differ from that is, and I'm gonna use an inappropriate word. I'm trying to find the specific word to this, so you'll have to bear with me until I can maybe explain it. Is I think my consultation process involves a bit more pressure, and again, the word pressure isn't quite right, but I try to reinforce a particular structure to my process. And I just want to make it very clear that the way that I do my consultations, I'm not at all suggesting that like this is the best way to do it. But this is a way that through my career has shown to have like the highest quality of communication between both parties. And it's led me to having a really clear idea of what my client wants, and it also gives the client it lets them know that there's an extra weight of responsibility within the process. While yes, of course, there's a financial transaction that's involved with the tattoo, and I would say 99% of the responsibility is on us. Or I'll use the number 90%. There's still a responsibility on the client in terms of obviously attending their dates, being clear in their communication, and sending letting you know if there's any alterations, last minute things. But also there is a certain responsibility in terms of clear communication from their part. And I don't want to suggest this is like you're forcing your client necessarily, but I like to think of it more as like you're coaching or steering them in a way that seems to have worked for your past clients. So instead of having like a continuously open Dropbox, typically what I'll do with my consultation process is I'll say, give it a good month, and I want you to, screenshot as many different things as you want. And then this is where it gets a little interesting, is I'll ask them to send me, let's say the client wants full sleeve of a dragon and a phoenix, and they want maybe a lotus. I'll ask them to send me 3 pictures, sometimes 5, but I try to stick it just to 3 pictures. 3 pictures of a dragon that they would like, 3 pictures that they don't like. And it's actually the ones that they don't like which are drastically more important to my creative process. And you'll do that so on and forth with the other subjects in mind. Now, are you guys interested in hearing more about that sort of like design process with my clients, or would you guys rather move to something else?
No, I love that idea of what they don't like. Do you get them to explain what they don't like and why?
Yes. Now this is another key thing in terms of communication, which I've learned just through trial and error, which is they will name the individual photos. And so it'll say dragon like 1, dragon like 2, dragon like 3, dragon dislike 1, dragon dislike 2, dragon dislike 3.
Hey, Patrick, hold on one second. I just lost her. I didn't lose your audio, but it just got really distant. Did that happen to everyone or just me?
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, how's it sounding now? Is it a little bit better now?
No, it's still the same. It's like we can hear you, but you're like way off. You just kind of like disappeared into the distance. Maybe go to your
Bluetooth thing.
Oh, could be, yeah.
I mean, guys, at the end of the world, I don't really need the headphones. So let me
Okay, yeah.
headphones, okay?
Yeah, maybe try it without the headphones. Go and go to your audio settings and set it to not in the headphones.
Does this sound at all, guys?
Yeah,
That's
way better. And Kurt has his hand raised.
Yeah.
I don't want to jump in ahead of you. I just that really piqued my interest. I often find myself sending my clients home for homework, but I don't think I've ever asked anybody to look for stuff that they don't like. And if you're going to explain it, I'm sorry for jumping in, but what would you say would be an awesome kind of like, I guess, like how do you kind of guide somebody to look for something they don't like? Or you just sort of like, if you stumble across something that you don't like, earmark it and save it in that folder. Like you don't necessarily have them look for stuff that they don't like.
Well, I do. I say, as you're looking for stuff that you do like, you're undoubtedly going to come across some stuff that you don't like, especially if a client is using Pinterest, which that'll usually be the app that I recommend as opposed to Google Photos. Because with the way that like a lot of these like search engines will work, you're going to find some stuff that you don't like. And the reason why the ones that they don't like is way more important is this is kind of bred from an experience that I actually got while getting tattooed, which was and just to clarify, I will do this process whether someone says they're super open-ended, like super open-minded, and I can do whatever they want, or if this is someone that was like a little bit more particular. It's the same across the board. So when I was just after I finished my apprenticeship, I was getting tattooed by this artist that I've been wanting to get tattooed for years, and you know, you're just so pumped, and you, at that point in your career, you're starting to better understand what makes a good client, what makes a bad client, and you think to yourself, oh, it's an easygoing client. It's a client that'll let me do whatever I want. So when I told Sergey, I was like, Sergey, I want a creepy statue. Do whatever you want. I trust you. But then the day of, when I actually saw the piece, I actually didn't like the design, and I think it was obviously an awkward moment, because it's like, I really didn't like the design, and you know, he had put a lot of work into it. Thankfully, like, you know, he was really inventive with Photoshop, so we were able to find a new design fairly quickly. But at the end of the day, I realized that though I was trying to be, you know, really open-minded, I had to kind of account for the fact that I might not be as open-minded as I wish I was. You know, maybe there are some things that I clearly don't want on my body. So sometimes that also made me realize sometimes you don't know if you don't like something until you actually see it. And so what I'm asking my clients to do is I'm asking them to sweep the field for minds, and then they're kind of like reporting back for me. They're like, hey, I've done the research. You know, I really don't like, you know, these wide open jaws. I don't really like, you know, the way that the pattern is done on the scales. They've, you know, considered the good and the bad. So ultimately, what that really helps me do is it creates a framework of possibilities. So I'm gonna just zoom in here, and let's get to some doodling here. But not a drawing, just a graph. So can everybody see the square here? I just want to make sure that it's still sharing the screen.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay, so even if a client tells me, Patrick, you have all the freedom in the world, do whatever you want, I don't really feel like I have full control over my creative process. And I'm not suggesting like divine intervention, but I do believe that there's like an unconscious, for lack of a better word, energy that directs my creative process. And again, I'm not suggesting like a literal spirit, but more so like the accumulation of references, books that I've read, and all these different things that are kind of filtered through me. The total sum of those experiences is really what guides the piece. And I just happen to be the hand that's kind of moving it. I'm just like maybe double checking. Maybe that sounds a little weird to say, but this square, we'll call this the field of creative possibility. All right. So what these four walls are made of are those reference pictures. They tell me the possibilities of, you know, what they're hoping to kind of aim for, but they're also really clearly offering to me an idea as to what they don't want. And so that kind of creates this box of possibilities here. So then that way, when I get dropped into this area, let's say I start here on the drawing, I can go whatever way I want with that drawing. I don't need to worry, like, hey, is this client gonna like this? You know, I could end up here, I could end up here, or I could end up here. But since that client's already provided what they don't like, I know that no matter where I end up, I'll be in a safe place. So it gives me the freedom to draw without kind of second guessing myself, if that makes sense. That would be the end of my answer.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's a great way to think about it too, you know, because everyone ends up kind of meandering off, you know, whenever you know, especially with larger pieces, when you've got hours and hours invested in them, then you think like, oh man, I took a turn 8 hours ago in this drawing that I'm not even sure we never even discussed. You know, I took a hard right and I may have gone, and then you start to get a little like self-conscious, and you're thinking like, oh, I'm a little scared to show them this because I'm really invested in it, and I don't know if I went way off track or not. So that's a great idea, man. That's super cool.
And here's the last step for the reference photos. So you name them with that system, so that then when they send you an email, they can very clearly write, dragon like one, I like the horns. It's that way, it's as clear as day. I don't even need to guess what in this reference picture is he looking at. that's what he likes about it. And same with the ones that they don't like. Because sometimes I find that if they're sending them via an email, the order will be scrambled. So their message to you might be, oh, in the first like dragon picture, I like this. And then when you open up the first dragon picture, maybe it's not at all the part of the dragon that they're referring to. So by naming the photos and then referencing them in the email, it makes that process of communication completely seamless. Yeah, that's about that I could think of. Did anybody else have any other questions, maybe before I move on to the 3 possible pieces that we can discuss tonight?
I say we jump in because it's 7:30 almost now, so we may as well get rolling with it, unless there's something that's directly related. Maybe we can do questions at the end if people want to hang later, and if you don't mind hanging later.
Oh, I'm totally fine. I have tomorrow off, so I'm fully dedicated to this. I just love talking about tattoos. So, all right, the crowd chooses. Either we can talk about, so the Monkey King is a full color back piece. The Kitsune is a full sleeve color, and the Grim Reaper is a full sleeve, mostly black gray with a little bit of color. Anyone that kind of stands out to you guys?
Kitsune.
Kitsune it is.
Yeah, I actually just did a handful this past weekend at Tattoo Lou, and I was having some trouble with positioning where to position the paws. They always seemed funky to me.
Yes. That's such a specific question that unless I'm kind of like working with the person in front of me, I don't really know how I could answer that, because you're right. There's such these like bizarre protuberances, like coming from the chest. So I know exactly what you're saying, and I mean like I'm okay with how mine turned out, but I think they could have been. So let me just jump in here. So now, typically when I'm lining, or when I'm my first few sessions, I tell my client,
Did you change something audio wise? You didn't go back to your headphones, did you? You just distorted again.
Oh, 1 second, guys. So,
Sorry.
Maybe the headphones are dying.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, is if the headphones might be dying.
All right. Sorry about that, guys. Can you guys hear me good now?
Yeah, perfect now.
Okay, so I'm going to just start off with this piece with showing line work. Typically, like my first few sessions, I'm really just thinking about composition. I've had periods in my career where I've over rendered a design, and I actually spoke about this in the podcast. Let me just grab a random book. I used to over render my designs, and I would put in all the shading for an entirety of a sleeve, but there became a problem where I found that they looked great as drawings, but they didn't necessarily translate to tattoos all too well. And the reason for that is I didn't really take into account the fact that you don't see all the planes of the arm at once. So, for example, with a full sleeve, you're not going to be looking at this corner of the design at the same time as that one, because it's more so outer bicep, tricep area, inner bicep. So there's 3 entirely different planes that you kind of need to consider all at once. So how my mentors, at least, were suggesting an effective process to me was to resolve all of your shapes at first. So typically line work, and in my case, I draw over a photo of the client's arm. Afterwards, you kind of put it on, and your design is really only going to be like 70% done. The rest of that, you have to let the body do the talking. So I'm placing my subject on, I'm seeing what areas just plain aren't working. I'm, revisiting them, and typically in lining sessions, I would much rather have good quality than quantity. So sometimes we'll only do 3 hours a day if it's a really tight 3 hours, and it might involve a whole bunch of extra time like freehanding, but it's the end result that's the most important. So after I've done my line work here, which I've I typically only do my line work with 3-round liner and gray wash, like really, really light gray wash. Unless I know for certain that these lines are going to be completely black. So everything that you can see here, I would say about 80% of these lines are dark gray wash. Sorry, light gray wash, and then 20% are black. And then over top of that, I'm then developing my color scheme. So I'm letting the literal frame of the arm help me in making some of those decisions with my values or my hues. Any question, but maybe before I go into, well, maybe I'll just leave it open for now. Any questions so far? I can't hear anybody, unfortunately.
I don't think anyone said anything. I think they're just waiting. I guess it means no questions.
Oh,
All right.
sorry. I was muted. Sorry. I had a quick question. So you're doing your line work first. You line out the entire arm and then get a photo and then do the color over it, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Now you mentioned, and I saw this portion in the Fireside video about how it seemed flat if you did the color ahead of time because you wanted like the shapes of the arm, I'm assuming, to be able to work with for your color and your values, correct?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand the question.
Oh, so in the video, or in the Fireside video that I watched earlier, it sounded like you refrained from doing your color concept in like the full line work rendering because you can't see every angle of it, correct?
Yes.
Like that was the main reason. Have you, and I know that this is a random question, but have you messed around with any of the 3D model on the arms to try to see if you can do that on the iPad?
Yes, that is my next step. I have to get out of my stubbornness, and I need to accept new modes of technology. So
Gotcha.
because I should be doing that, certainly, yes.
Okay, yeah, that was just a big question because I've been messing around with that a little bit lately too, and I just wanted to ask about that. So.
Okay, well, thank you for asking. I appreciate you you asking that. Anything else? All right. So as I'm working on this particular piece, another big factor involved with this is that we were ultimately kind of merging it with the piece over top. So this is actually by my mentor, no pressure. And I had to merge these shapes. So the solution that I found was I had to kind of ask myself, okay, so what am I working with? I'm working with these really light gray wash lines that the silhouette kind of goes down here. And so I told myself, how am I going to merge this shape kind of downwards? And I thought, what about a cast shadow? What if I have this cloud putting a cast shadow over top? And then maybe do the same thing over here. So maybe put a cast shadow on this guy, and then I'll do the black, do all the rest of the talking, which is how I ended up with this here. So then that way I can then apply color more clearly later on, and it should look seamless in the end. All right, this is another thing I was going to mention. Just drawn while you're on the subway. I would take pictures at the end of my sessions, and while I'm on my subway, I would just use like the edit markup tool, and I would just block in shapes. And obviously you're not really going to be making any major decisions, finger painting on your phone on the subway. But the point of me maybe showing these photos and bringing it up is just any time that I can think about the piece more critically, especially the day of the session, like on the commute home, the better it is, because it's right after that session that at least I find that my mind's the sharpest. I've just been engaging with these shapes. I've just been engaging with these values. So why not continue that considerate process just for, an hour or two while you're on your way home. And that way, months down the line, if you need to, you can refer back to those and like, oh yeah, that was a thought that I had back then. This is about my layering process. So now we're going to be getting a little funky in terms of how I like to layer my colors. So I like to separate my color process into two separate ones. Let's go here. I like to do, let's do two different layers. Now I'm going to be using some, maybe using some terms incorrectly, but I'm just conveying what's been kind of referenced to me. So the bottom layer I would kind of call the local color. If anybody's not familiar with that, from my understanding, it's kind of like if you point at a red fire truck, you say, hey, that's red. But that being said, if you actually take an eyedropper tool to that, you'll see that there's browns, there might be some grays, there might be some pinks. So that I might refer to as like texture detail. And then that I kind of keep as a completely separate layer. The reason why I particularly take this approach is because it makes me have great respect for like color realism artists, but I don't want to risk having like big areas of ink coming out, whether it's from being overworked or from the client, picking or scratching at something. And I want my heels to be as good as possible. So the compromise that I make with my process is it'll take a little bit longer, but I like to layer things as opposed to trying to take like a more of a direct painting method. I like to do an indirect painting method. So in this particular image here, all of the yellow that I've applied, I'm just putting in flat yellow. I'm trying to put in what's going to be one of the lightest values in that area. I will try to keep my color transitions to a bare minimum, 2 or 3 colors at most. So you'll see that there's some pink here going into some yellow. There'll be some fuchsia going into some purple, and I'm also going to be bringing in some black from the bottom. But I try to keep it as bare minimum as possible. While I understand that like the skin will superficially heal in, we tell our clients like 3 weeks. And I'm really curious if anybody agrees or disagrees with me, because at the end of the day, like I'm learning at the same pace you guys are, right? So while, yeah, that top layer is healed in like, 2 to 3 weeks, I'm finding that when I'm putting in a second pass of color, if I wait like the bare minimum, there's almost like a grittiness to the skin where it almost like for lack of a better word, I'm going to sound like an idiot, but it feels like there's like grains of sand in the skin that the needles are like kind of making contact with. And you guys actually might see the effects of that later on in one of the photos if it's clear enough when I zoom in. But I find that if I give 2 to 3 months of healing and then they come back, I'm working with completely different skin. It's as if it's brand new skin, and it can take significantly more work. As for needles, the only thing I can bother to say is since they're like more simple transitions, I've been trying to go more towards just like standard needles and no bug pins for that point on. Here it is again, just straight yellow, straight blue, and straight black. Keep it as simple as possible. Before I get into like multi-layering stuff, does anybody have any questions?
I
did.
Oh, go ahead, Kurt. I don't have a question. Go.
I can't shut the fuck up. I always have questions. I'm trying not to slow us down too much here, dude. I'm sorry. But again, Pat, thanks for your time. It looks like you end up, if you decided you were gonna bump like a gradient a little bit darker, say in that blue, you would add that later, right? So you're gonna flat blue it and then bring black back into it later.
I can. It depends what kind of shift am I looking for. Am I looking for a shift that's going to decrease my saturation, or am I looking for a shift that's going to decrease my value? Or sometimes it's it's both things are happening simultaneously. So if I'm looking to really desaturate it and bring it down a few notches in terms of value, then yeah, I'll go in straight for black. But if we'll remember, one of the really cool things about Titian, for example, like one of the great I think maybe Renaissance painters, maybe he's post-Renaissance, I don't know exactly. He had this one painting of some drapery that I really loved. And, while I was in art school, I had no idea what it was that I liked about it. And here's a little thing that I was also told in art school, that turned out to not be so true after a while, is I was told the light side is always more saturated than the dark side. That was my thought for a long time. One of my clients, one time it was our first session, and the changes that he was requesting were suspiciously well-informed changes. And when I asked him, what do you do for a living? He says, oh, I run an anime studio. We're doing an anime for Netflix. And he happens to show me his portfolio. This guy is like leagues more experienced than I am in terms of art. And later on, the question of like saturation in the shadows kind of came up, and he was saying, oh, that's, why the shadows are always more saturated. And
also is the opposite.
Yes, so that's what he was suggesting. And sure enough, we brought in a bunch of paintings, and that's exactly what was happening. The shadows were consistently more saturated. Now, yes, of course, your eye might be telling you that it's, there's some complex stuff happening with like the human eye in terms of how.
Oh, they're tricky, man. Oh,
they're tricky. Eyeballs.
Yeah.
That's why we can't make them in a lab. All right, so Titian, what he was sometimes doing is he was pushing these like really intense oranges in the shadows of these yellow drapes. And when that client Richie told me this, I was like, oh fuck, that's how Titian gets those yellow fabrics to look so great. Because my solution, if I'm using a yellow and I'm trying to desaturate, it's like, oh shit, I gotta like go into like mustards, or I gotta go into like browns, but it's not really giving me the look that I'm going for. The answer is just go with a more saturated one. So long story short, if I'm trying to darken some of these areas, I might actually use a more saturated, darker value blue, which I think is what I'm doing in the piece.
Dude, unlocked. Thank you, sir.
No problem. All right. So this is a secondary layer of work on that. So if we kind of compare the two, we're looking at practically no line weight here. We're looking at introducing line weight later on. We're also adding in, let me see here. I'm adding in probably some more black. You're right, in these areas here. It's probably more black, just to kind of knock it back a bit. I'm also then adding in my complementary colors. So, with the purples, I'm adding in those pinks and I'm adding in those yellows, just to kind of go around them. Here, all that gray wash is settled in. So of course, it's not going to be as vibrant as the areas that I want back here, but at least the shadow shape is consistent, because then that tells the viewer, oh, this is like at least this is like consistent visual phenomena. And the lighting and the saturation might not make exact sense, but it makes enough sense for you to be able to read the picture. Or at least that's what my intentions were. Then even at this stage, I consider alterations, which is what you're seeing here. So now that I've gotten to see how do these, kind of colors settle into the skin, I at that point I kind of abandoned what my original sketch was. At that point, the body needs to be making more of the decisions. So that's looking at how does this client's skin tone maybe shift the color one way or another. So that's when I'm thinking to myself, you know what, I think this area needs a little pop to something. And I found that the solution was I had to reintroduce cool tones into those areas here. So I reintroduced cool tones into areas that maybe didn't have them. So you might even notice that like the eyeballs, put a little bit of green in the eyeballs. Just trying to figure out how I can make the work fizzle a little bit more. And then also asking myself, does this have as much depth as I want it to have? The answer was no. So, just working on some more depth. And the question comes up, how do you explain this process to your client? How the hell do you explain this process of like, I'll be honest with you, man, I don't really know what I'm going to do till it's done. I think if the entirety of your process is honest and sincere, they're going to tell that you're not trying to put in this extra detail to, squeeze a buck out of them. And sometimes that also means I'm asking a client to come in maybe on my day off, just to give them like an hour or two free of charge. And I'm not advocating everybody to do that necessarily, but if it's a way for you to, finish a portfolio piece and get like that last little bit of detail in, it ends up paying off way more than the money that I've lost, doing a session free of charge. And so then this was the final result for the piece. So mind you, you're going to see different saturation levels here because of obviously different lighting scenarios. And some of these are completely raw photo files and dependent on the settings. So if we look on this though, we'll kind of see the result of that. So a whole lot of stuff going on in it. Whole lot of stuff. Here's a shot of the inside. So here we can actually see the colors that I ended up using. So I don't know what color I would have maybe grabbed out of the bottle, but those definitely look to me like solid ink teal. And then I went over it with Fusion Nico Hurtado Blue Steel. And the green is Eternal Ink Aquamarine or Solid Ink Dragon. I look at ink bottles a lot, so I'm pretty confident those are the colors I used. Yeah.
I love that dragon color from Solid.
They gave it the right name.
Hey Patrick, can you go back to that last slide just a touch? That little line, the little highlight line of the teal that you put through the yellow there, that's a really cool decision. What made you do that?
Yes. All right, here we go. Color theory. Oh, I love talking about color theory. Color's fun. All right, so I'm actually going to answer your question. A little bit of a long format here. Let's say we're doing a sleeve, but this will answer your question. We're doing a sleeve. All right. Client says that they want red dragon, blue koi fish. Red dragon, blue koi fish, and they specify that this is the placement that they want. How do you make those two areas cohesive? Obviously, you can make it cohesive by introducing similar visual language. So whether that's waves here, or you can even introduce like a consistent shape that goes through across the piece. So that's wind bars. But you can also do it with color. So one of the little theories that I was kind of taught was this idea of like 70-30, or you can make it whatever numbers you want. You can make it like 80-20. But the idea is, let's say this guy's red. We want 80% of the design at the top to be red, or you could, do warm tones. So I'll go like this, and we'll maybe go with yellow, but we just need a little pinch of yellow because the value is so different than the red. But that's 80%. And then 20% or 30%, whatever you want, I'm going to put in some of these tones that are referencing the bottom of the composition, and then vice versa over here. So then this is going to be 80% cool tones, but I'm throwing in some red, some orange, and a little bit of yellow. That way they're a little bit more even, and the colors are more cohesive throughout the entire piece. And I almost like to think of it as like a ripple of color. So here's like ground zero of that red explosion, and then just as it gets farther and farther away, there's like little ripples of that color. And then same thing with that blue where it's rippling back up. So how did that green get into that yellow? The idea was, I want to bring a little bit of that cool color into some of these like overwhelmingly warm areas, just so that I can strike a little bit of a better balance. And then same with, using sometimes warm colors and cool ones. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
All right.
So one thing that's really interesting about that, and the reason I bring it up is because your initial layout here is you find the local color for each individual element and you lay that in first. And so that is, in my opinion, kind of what gives a lot of that illustrative, kind of graphic look, and also the reason that you can get away with having so many textures and patterns and things happening in this sleeve, but it still reads cohesively. But then you have this other element where you're like, you want to create that, you want an environment that looks like it all belongs together and not like you've got stickers slapped on top of stickers. So you need, like, if you're thinking of it, if from a painting standpoint, you need that like atmosphere, the background atmosphere to bleed into the foreground subject a little bit, just so it looks like it belongs in there. And so to me, that line that Dan is talking about is a way to pull that off graphically without literally like bathing the foreground in the background temperature or color, you know?
Yes, very good observation. Now I have all night to keep talking about this stuff. Like, how much more time are we supposed to be doing this for?
It's up to, I mean, it's scheduled 7 to 8, but I'm down for whatever you guys want to do. Just keep rolling. I'm going to take a quick bathroom break though, so you guys keep going without me.
I'll
All
go
right.
till midnight.
Oh, that's sick. All right.
Patrick,
Dude,
I have
I'm-
one quick question.
I'm good
for
till 3.
Go right ahead.
you. Pertaining to the client interaction, you talked about, guiding them to, through your reasoning for needing that next pass and getting more refinement in there. I'm curious about how much persuading you need to do, and if that has changed over the years. I know you've got a pretty banging portfolio and proof of concept, so I guess you can be like, trust me, and they'll follow, or am I wrong?
Well, this goes back to why I found the word like pressure that I used to be inappropriate, because you're at the end of the day, we don't want to be trying to like, bully or submit someone to, going with our choices. Because at the end of the day, it's completely within their right to just say no to you.
Sure.
So I just try to be as open and transparent, and I don't want to say I give them the impression that I really care about them, or I really care about their idea, or I really care about the trust that they're putting in me. But I think I'm not going to be quite answering your question, but I think the entirety of my process is attentive enough to communicate to the client that their happiness is like the number one concern that I have, whether that means I'm tattooing them or not. So if it's someone that I'm not going to end up tattooing at the end of the day, like, I'm completely fine with that, and I'm not going to, be mad at someone for wasting my time. Because at the end of the day, like, we're all just trying to be happy, and I try to not approach it too confrontationally. It's just, these are my ideas. If you like them, then hey, that works great. We can work together. And don't have any problem if they don't agree with you, right? They're going to find someone that works for them.
I understand.
All right. So, couple different things that we can talk about. We can either talk about values. I can kind of choose two different pieces: values or maybe composition. Which one of those two things are you guys maybe more interested in?
Ooh. Values.
All right, values.
Let's go.
Values. The maze we never escape in terms of learning is values. So let's start with Tyler's piece. Tyler is an amazing tattoo artist out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And it was a real pleasure to tattoo him. And I'm super pumped to walk everyone through this piece.
This one's my favorite piece for sure. I love this one so much. This is so cool.
Thank you. It's you know how sometimes you do a tattoo and you tell yourself, oh, that's an actual tattoo. I actually made a tattoo, right? But you only have a few of those pieces in your career. I'll have like probably less than 10, like, or not, maybe less than 7 that I'll be like, that's a tattoo. I did one. This is one of them. This is one of them. So, all right. Tyler's a tattoo artist, so there were obviously some differences to the process than I would have done, with another client. It was something where I had sent him, not even this sketch, I'd sent him something that was far more ludicrous than that. But that's typically how my sketches are from the beginning. I wish I had a little bit more to show you guys, but this is what we have to work with for now. I'm going to very quickly touch about composition first. Let's talk about compositionally flexible versus compositionally inflexible subjects or parts of a subject. Let's do a little line here. Over here is flexible, and over here is inflexible. So flexible all the way at the end, and these are just what I think, are guys like snakes And maybe over here, I'll put dragons. Okay, so the reason why snakes are compositionally flexible is because they are literally flexible. You can do this, you can do that, you can do that. That's a snake, right? Dragon has a little bit more complexity to it. It's got, you know, this guy, and then we got these arms. So now we've added in expectations to the piece. We've added expectations to the viewer as to like where these things kind of need to belong, right? As we go farther and farther down the scale, the composition is less compromising. So I would say over here is maybe like geometric stuff, right? It's entirely based on like precision and math. So there's this, at least from my perspective, it seems to be a lot less compositionally flexible. That being said, they still do some insane things compositionally. And then over here, we'll have maybe like humans, right? Because we have kind of like a set of expectations as to what a human being should look like. And that's why even our aunt that has no experience drawing can look at your drawing and tell you, there's something a little bit weird looking about that one, right? So you can only bend an arm so far until it just looks like their arm is broken. And so with every subject that you're doing, you have to learn not only how compositionally flexible or inflexible it is, but you also have to learn its many components. So you can break down any subject into a few key parts, and then you have to figure out which one of these are the most compositionally flexible versus the ones that are compositionally inflexible. So a crane, for example, let's say we're doing a full sleeve of a crane. So are we going to have the beak going this way? No, because we're going to be seeing this. The hell kind of bird is that? It's like a hummingbird, right? This guy asked for a crane. So no. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that crane head on a diagonal so that you can see more of it from one particular plane. In other words, you're giving more context as to what they're supposed to be looking at. And so that is a compositionally inflexible part of a crane. Whereas, you know, its wings, you can maybe get a little bit kind of funkier with its wings because, you know, they bend more. And then sometimes on cranes, you'll see like these little big fluffy guys. These fluffy guys, these are your compositionally flexible elements of that subject. So in terms of a Grim Reaper, what do I know I need? I need a face, probably need some hands because somebody needs to be holding a scythe. So I have a scythe, I have a skull, and I have robes. So I've determined what are the things that have to kind of belong in this piece. So okay, so then I have to kind of like measure them. What's compositionally flexible and what's compositionally inflexible? The least compositionally flexible thing in this design is going to be the scythe, or at least the pole of the scythe. Why? Because it's like an industrially produced object, or I don't know where Grim Reaper picks up his scythes from, but you know, they're a shape to say the least. So you got to figure out where that shape's going to go first. I know that the blade is going to be a little bit more composition flexible because it kind of bends. And at that point, I'm letting that make some of my decisions for me. So I'm making sure not to put the pole of the scythe maybe on like the brachioradialis, which is like the muscle that kind of transitions from the upper arm to the lower arm. Or I might not have it go through like a ditch because I don't want it to warp too much. That's kind of how I let the shape, the essential shapes of the subject guide me to how I'm going to make my design. And again, I just lined everything. I just bothered to bring this one in because this stuff here is all photoshopped in because the day of, I found that the sketch didn't actually work as well as I hoped with the body. And so sent him home after the first day and we just did this. I just worked on placing that face somewhere, and I guess we'll do some swirly clouds. And you know, I've been looking a lot at Phibbs' work recently and I loved the simplicity of it. So that's what I chose to do. Any questions so far?
I don't have any questions, but I think it's interesting that you brought up the beak of the crane. We just had, who was it? Allison, was it you?
Yeah. I was laughing about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So she had kind of a thigh piece, but with the beak of the crane like as a hard horizontal, and we had basically that same discussion. But I like this I like framing it in this way. That I hadn't thought of that.
Well, thank you. And just to that point, I'm not sure how much of this you were saying about it, but yeah, I would avoid horizontals and verticals in the body because they just don't exist. We're all just a bunch of diagonals and curved lines. So, or, I don't know, maybe there's some people that are real square and pointy. I don't know. So again, lining the whole piece, and I'm adjusting all of my values the day of. Tyler had requested kind of like a fall palette. So, all right, so then I'm working with yellows, oranges, reds, but then I also need to try to separate my values. So my cat's playing with a ball of paper, so you might hear him occasionally. So I need to separate those colors in terms of their value. So that's why I pushed for like a really light yellow and a really dark red, so that I'm purposefully exaggerating the values for the color so that they have a chance of actually remaining once like the entirety of the project is done, right? And here I have some of that application there. Does anybody have any questions about any of like the color application that you can think of?
Yeah, I was wondering about the reds, like you're layering different layers of red to get the really deep ones. Do you have a recommendation for getting that nice, rich, deep red?
Oh, dark reds are a real tricky one. They're a real tricky one. So you can also sometimes think of it as like it's actually kind of like a color trick, which is that you change, I change the hue of the leaf as it transitions from light to dark. So my light side, I'm going to have it touch a little bit on the orange side. And then in the shadows, I'm going to push with a little bit of a cooler red. And so then that way I'm not only using value contrast, but I'm also using temperature contrast and hue contrast. And it also gives me an excuse to inject more saturation in the shadows, which then gives you an overall more saturated leaf. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. So again, with these color choices, it was going to be just light yellows, and I want to introduce some cast shadows. And in order to kind of use as much depth as possible, I ended up going with a kind of like a mustardy yellow. So this was Anonymous by Solid Ink. And also with the line weight, here you'll also see I used a 3-round liner with a light gray wash, and the leaves in the foreground I'm putting in with black. And typically at the end of a session, I'm going to reconsider line weights for the entirety of the piece. Here's another shot here. I might just add one thing, which is that typically my approach is to do background first, especially get those blacks in. But I actually wanted to try something different. If I recall what my train of thought was I wanted to do the color first because I wanted there to be more values in place when I'm approaching my dark gray washes, because I find that obviously it's like your eye will adjust contrast based off of what's around that area. I needed to give myself like the context to then better find the value that I wanted in the gray wash. So I plugged in my colors because I know that those are going to heal. There's less of a drop off. So the way that my midtones heal, there's less of a change from fresh to healed than there is with color. So I did my colors first, and I gave myself the context to then do black and gray shading. Apart from black is black. That's easy to figure out. Again, using a thick black outline against all that light stuff really helps give it some dimension. Here we start with the red. So I think in the light side, I'm using Diablo. So these little sections here, that's going to be Solid Ink Diablo. And then I'm probably going into like I think it was like Bordeaux or Burgundy, or maybe it was even a brown. I can't remember exactly what it was. Here we are with the inside. So I've yet not put in my final line weight, as you can see. And this gray wash looks really, 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 really dark when it's fresh. And then when it's healed, it becomes significantly lighter. Now, Tyler had a really incredible back piece by a guy named Hodgin. And I think back to one of Gogwe's DVDs or one of his interviews where he talks about when he's merging a tattoo into another one, he always starts the composition there, which Jake and I touched upon briefly. So I wanted to push Hodgin's tattoo into mine so that at the end of the entirety of Tyler's experience, he's going to have one seamless bodysuit. So I and it also helped me resolve what the hell am I going to do with the back of the arm? Because that's always like, that's no man's land. No one knows what the hell is happening on the tricep. So Hodgin, you gave me the answer, buddy. So I literally just hit like the literal cherry blossom on Tyler's back. And I just popped a few of those on his arm, and I kind of let that do the talking. Here we are with final revisions. So getting everything ready for the end. And that's when I decided to put a hint of green in there just to kind of offset all the rest of that. And I also was like, you know what? I'm going to put some black flames, because why not? I want to just see. Oh, no. This was all that gray wash fresh. This is like, I think this was like our second to last set of sessions. And then these are the final pictures. So here again, I'm reintroducing all that line weight contrast. I'm going and I'm kind of finishing the last little bits that I didn't really get a chance to, and plugging in all that negative space. Oh, one point that I want to bring up. Look at this. See that? Oh man, those dark reds, they even give me a whole lot of trouble. Really wanted to show that one. Doesn't matter like how many years of tattooing you're doing, you're still gonna mess it up. And it's still gonna make you ask yourself, am I made for this? Am I supposed to be a tattoo artist? All right, so.
Well, real quickly, I love that you showed that, but real quickly, that going back to the tracing of the cherry blossoms and using it in your piece, it's one of those things that when people see that, like, oh, that's really thoughtful. And it is. It's like, oh, that's cool how you pulled someone else's piece, but it's also the ultimate trick and cheat, and it's easier than anything else that you could have done. And that's the thing that I like. It took me too long to realize. It's like, not only do I need to consider the shapes of the existing tattoo, if there's any way for me to just snatch something from it and use it to make the transition, it's a lot easier than me trying to solve the problem in a different way.
Yes, very well put, because from my understanding with that too, you're just pushing that visual language further into your piece, and you're drawing a lot less attention to that transition than you are like what your final subject is. I really like that. Great idea. And yeah, these are beautiful things. These are the final pictures. That concludes what I can say about this piece. Any questions from anybody about this one?
I have two questions real quick, if you don't mind. First question, you mentioned gray wash. Do you have a particular brand that you use, or do you mix in the cup?
I'm always mixing my inks. So I'm using solid ink lining black for like literally everything. Okay. My ink caps are full black, and I'm using large ink caps. So I'm using full black and a smaller ink cap. I'm using 10 drops, 5 drops, and sometimes 3 to 2 drops, which I understand seems like, why are you only putting 2 drops? What effect is that going to have? But for whatever reason, with my application method, you can get some insanely dark tones with just like 2 or 3 drops of black with very minimal damage. I'm not saying I have a secret technique. I don't know. That's what I'm doing. It seems to work.
Yeah, I saw in one of your posts, I believe it was whenever you were transitioning from the 3 drop to the 2 drop. And I wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. My pleasure. The reason why I like to mix my own inks in the cup with distilled water is just it helps me just stay more connected to my materials, and it just makes me more thoughtful, in my opinion. I can't speak for anybody else, but I find that it makes me more thoughtful. One last little thing I might touch upon this one that I'm only realizing now, like, you sneaky bugger, you did that. I really like this line here. There's some interesting stuff happening with like this line where I've made a decision to have that texture line in a light gray wash, but as soon as it enters the shadow side, I'm like, nah, I'm going to do that guy black. And then that way, from a distance, it helps kind of like reinforce that cast shadow happening.
I love that.
Yeah, it definitely does. And one thing about this piece that really stands out to me is just the placement of the focal points. Obviously, a face and a hand are both going to grab attention, and typically people aren't going to put a focal point that low on the bicep or that high on the forearm. It's either something that sits, up on the top of the arm or down on the middle of the forearm. But if you think about this person like in a t-shirt, which is something I think about more and more because I see my clients in shirts and in clothes so often, I'm like, oh, I wish I had moved that slightly, or I hate the way that it gets cropped by that length of t-shirt. Like, it's almost impossible for this not to be attention grabbing when this person is wearing a t-shirt, because that focal point is like right at the area that, first off, it's an area, like I said, that's not typically a focal point. And then it's not only is it framed well by the supporting elements, but if this person is wearing a t-shirt instead of a tank top, it's framed well by the shirt, most likely. So that's to me, that's really one of the things that makes this, in Andy Chambers' terms, go from like a really good piece to an exceptional piece. Is that decision.
I really appreciate that, man. It means a lot. I'll be honest with you, I was never thinking about the t-shirt thing, but that's something I should do more now. So thank you for being so observant about that. That means a lot, man.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Patrick,
any other questions?
Yeah, the subtlety in this piece is beautiful. I'm curious. I have two separate questions. One is just curiosity about time invested in this sleeve in particular. Do you recall approximate number of sessions or general length of sessions?
Yes. So I'll try my best, and I'll offer some stories about how long what was told to me, how long your best pieces will take you. So I'll say what the number of sessions were, but that's not really going to answer your question. It was, I think, 10 sessions to do this full sleeve. That being said, though, every part of the process has completely different goals in mind. And so that's going to also dictate like the length of my sessions. As I was mentioning earlier, like with my lining sessions, I'll often keep them really short. I think our first two sessions were only 3 hours each, so 6 hours total to line. And after that point, it becomes a little bit more murky as to how long our sessions are. But I would guess an average of 5 to 6 hours of billable time. But that doesn't include, freehanding and all the revisions. So I want to guess 40 to 50 hours in this piece, which is a lot. It's a lot of time for a full sleeve, especially when someone's traveling. But the thing that kind of changed it for me was just hearing to like some of the artists that I really admired, because like, in terms of speed with tattooing, like, there's a guy named Damian Robertson here in Canada who's like exceptionally fast. I've seen that guy do a full sleeve lining and shading in 2 days. Like, he finished a full sleeve in 2 days. And
he's working in black and gray though too, right?
Yes, that's right. He's doing it in black and gray. I've seen like James Tex, I think he did full sleeve, full color of like these like window panes almost, or like stained glass. He did a full sleeve in 2 sessions. And there'll be days where I'll be be a little bit down, I'll be a little bit insecure about like the speed of my process. But then when I was really looking at Damian's work, I'm finding out that so much of those efficiencies is coming into his like shape design. So he's typically working with simpler shapes, which is then allowing you to not have to fuss over like the subtleties of a particular area. And that's, not me trying to take away from what he did. It was still fantastic. But the length of a project is ultimately going to also depend on the intricacy of the piece. So, and so many other factors. I'm going to be showing another back piece of a Monkey King. And that one I finished full color, and I want to say like somewhere like 12 to 15 sessions. I have another full color back piece that I'm doing of theoretically the same size that is going to probably be pushing 25 sessions to finish that particular piece. And that's going to have to do with how painful it is for the client, because then we're breaking it off into further sessions, the quality of the skin, or I should say how easy the skin is to work with, the amount of transitions that are in it. And of course the size of the person too, right? Alex, one of my clients, is a huge guy, so that's where his is coming in at 25 sessions to finish. But on the flip side, I've also heard of some of my idols in the same genre of tattooing that a lot of people think that I'm doing, and they're looking at 20 sessions for a full color back piece from like the neck to the knees. So when you understand that there's a spectrum of either possibility, knowing that I'm just somewhere in the center lets me know that, okay, at least I know I can like sleep at night knowing that I'm not intentionally trying to, squeeze more money out of someone. So to answer your question about the piece, 40 to 50 hours of tattooing, and probably an additional 10 hours of drawing and revisions over time, and 3 hours of freehanding, I imagine.
I think it's important to talk about that kind of shape design. And to me, it's learning to recognize your own tendencies. And when this is something I've been thinking about plugging into my Find Your Style seminar or workshop is exercises and understanding like what your kind of limits are, what your capabilities are. So you talked about fibs earlier, and I was lucky enough to tattoo with fibs at Guru Tattoo a couple of years back. We had booths in the same room, and so I got to watch him work on the stuff that he does, and he's incredibly fast, but the shapes are so powerful, so simple, so dynamic that they don't have to be that clean. His lines are not clean, they're fast. It's from black to skin tone. The way that the chrysanthemum or whatever, the way that it sweeps down the leg is so dynamic just in its simplicity that if it's rendered too much, it probably doesn't even have the same impact. And so it's not that you can't do really dynamic, powerful tattoos quickly and efficiently and get large scale stuff done fast. If you recognize that, okay, that's the kind of thing that I don't have the attention span to scumble lines and taper line weights and do this over multiple sessions. I want to move on to something else. Well, great. You probably should tattoo more like fibs. Or if it's like, I like to lay down local colors and start to push, start to tint my shadows cooler or warmer and my this and that in multiple sessions. And I enjoy that kind of tedious process. All right, well, then that's, probably the direction you should go. But there's not a right or a wrong, but it's definitely, you have to pay attention to what your tendencies are, I think, and work towards them.
Great point. To that.
Ooh, Patrick.
Yes.
Okay, if I ask one more question on the Grim Reaper.
That is Phil. I can tell that's Phil's voice.
Yes, it is.
All right, go ahead.
Favorite part is on the inside, and I wanted to ask about the transparency on like that smoke. Right there.
Yeah.
And how do you want to ask about?
Yeah, exactly. Like that translucent
good.
effect looks so good. Yeah.
I fucking love it. Looks like incense smoke.
Mm-hmm.
Let me try to hone in on what I must have been thinking when I did it. I asked myself, what effect does that transparency have? Is it lightening or darkening it? So I just asked myself, okay, I want this smoke to be lightening it, so I just make everything behind that smoke darker. I'm sorry if that's a way too simple of an answer, but I think that's I have to remind myself to think about it that simply, or else I'll overthink it. So that's what I tell myself.
Thank you.
All right, Monkey King time. Oh boy, it's a Monkey King. So when looking for references, I try to think as broadly as I can afford to. So the idea that I kind of had in my head was like, I want to do like a Monkey King fighting my client wanted a Monkey King fighting a tiger, and he kind of had described two possibilities, either really fierce or really playful. Initially, I had actually intended on doing something that was really playful. So I had been working with this particular composition where I was looking at actually Spider-Man as an idea, because I knew that I wanted him to be kind of flexible and flying around, and I thought to myself, oh, Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man is such an amazing reference for something that's like gestural. So I'm going to use that for the time being. And so I kind of ended up with this sort of composition here, where we have him kind of jumping over the tiger. Didn't end up working in the end, but I just still wanted to show that. And this is one of the tigers I was looking at. This crazy one. I was a little bit too ambitious with what I wanted to do with my composition. It was way too complex of composition, so I had to kind of dial it back. Like as you were saying, is like just kind of being honest with where you are in your development. Didn't feel like I was at the point where I could tackle this level of complexity, where there's already so many different types of like foreshortening happening that is then going to be combined with what the body's doing to it. As of now, that's a composition for me to tackle a long time in the future. So I ended up going with a relatively more static pose, but I had to go with a completely different sort of idea, which is going to be power. So how do I get power? And if we recall those, the conversation of like inflexible versus flexible subjects, the Monkey King is the staff, right? So I know that I need a staff in there, and I want to make a statement. So I'm just going to put a big ass line that goes through most of the piece. Have that be, that I've spent my straight line budget of this whole piece on that part. There's a certain budget for everything that you're using, whether it's water, whether it's detail, and just be mindful of that budget. This was my expression of that strong diagonal line budget. At this point, I'm then going over top of it. I'm just trying wacky color combinations. You can see this, I'm just painting colors in, and I'm just like flickering through different filters. I'm just duplicating a layer and just flickering through and just letting random chance take me on unexpected areas. As much as like, I have some minor experience as a painter to help me make some of these decisions. Sometimes it's just like pure coincidence that you come up to something that's really great. So this is about as complex as I make my drawings sometimes. Why do I keep them so loose? Because the body's going to mess it up throughout the process anyways. And how do I assure my clients that we're going to get a great result in the end? I'm just, I'm being very transparent with previous pieces, and I'm showing them, see, this makes no sense at this point. And then it made sense when we already tattooed it on you. So kind of leaning back on your old work is going to be really helpful. And if we can remember that idea of the 80-20 for color, the same thing's happening here. So I have a whole bunch of teal. I got to figure out some way to push it across the composition. So I figured let's put a little hit in that chin area. So then that way we're pushing that color to the opposite side of the composition. As for our background here, this is all just gray wash waste. I wanted to go with something that was really simple, really powerful, to then contrast with what's happening at the top. Here we have the execution of that plan. Just a big ass tiger head, not messing around. Here we have, some stages of the process. Here's the under layer. So this is what I was referring to as my local color. So if you look here, that's just straight orange going right over top of that brown. Here we have two colors max. We have brown into orange. Two colors max. We have like some purple into some pink. Yeah, I try to keep it super, super simple, just all teal. And then later on, make all your revisions based off of that. So I let the body do a lot of the talking in the process. So that's how I came to that guy. And here is that first color, thoroughly applied, and then I'm just trying to introduce some more bits of detail, and then we have the final result here. This photo is a little bit too saturated. I feel like I'm a con artist when I look at this one. Sorry about that, guys. All right, questions about this one?
Kurt has his hand raised.
Yeah, as always. Well, I have a consult here, so I do have to bounce. If you guys are still in, I'll try to tag in later. But I wanted to say thank you very much for your time. You've disseminated a lot of information and made it very, very, very clear. Some stuff that was really, really helpful. And I just wanted to say thanks very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure, man. Shoot me a DM if you have any questions in the future. Anytime.
You'll regret that, but thanks.
No. It's good. It's good. Shoot me a question. I'm always open.
Hey, Kurt, it'll be, I mean, if you want to zoom into wherever part of this conversation this is, we'll have it up on the Discord server. The rest of it, it's all recorded and will be in the replay. So
Awesome. I'll listen to it 6 or 7 times. Again, thank you, Patrick.
No problem. My pleasure, man.
So I had a quick question, and it's something I actually kind of struggle with. Most of my tattoos, it's like wall-to-wall saturation. That's something that I'm trying to kind of get further away from. Do you have any advice as far as like where to leave skin breaks, or how to operate your design process around skin breaks?
Ooh. Oh man, that's a big one. That's something that I really want to work on myself. Seeing as I'm working on that at the moment, I don't feel as if I'm the most qualified to necessarily answer that question. But some things that I try to keep in mind are like, what are like the intended local values of the objects? So I knew that waves are generally going to be the lightest part of the piece. So I know that I'm going to have a pretty big budget of negative space that I can use on the waves, right? I think it's also going to depend on like what's like the pigmentation of the client too, or what type of skin are you working on. Like I tattooed a head recently, and after like during the second session, and I saw how it healed. The skin seemed to be so thick that it really desaturated, and it really sort of like averaged out a lot of my tones and a lot of my colors. And I had to really rethink the amount of negative space. I had to kind of like ditch the sketch altogether, because at that point I just had to have like the light side of the subject had to just be skin tone. I had to make that much of a harsh decision. I had to push the contrast like that much. And I kept the shadow side complex, and I kept the simplicity for the light side, where I could keep as much of the skin tone as possible. And I just tried to keep that visual language consistent of the whole piece. So everything on the light side, super simple, and as much skin tone as possible. Everything on the shadow side, complex and dark.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I have an idea on that negative space, and this is something that Andy Chambers and I have talked about a lot. And it was actually, I believe, his initial idea. But let's take a sleeve for an example. You were talking about where to use negatives and where not to. So the great thing about negatives is that they're like the greatest asset you have in moving your eye through a composition. So because the skin is it'll always be the lightest thing you can have over a long period of time. And so Andy, we were talking about the areas that no one likes to tattoo. So the front and the back, the spongy parts of the armpit, right? The front and the back of the armpit, the elbow, the bend of the arm. And then if you add to that, the 2 bones at the base of the wrist, on the thumb and on the pinky side. And so what we started doing, and he and I were playing around drawing one night when I was there getting tattooed, it's like just trying to find, before we even were like thinking of the design. So before there's a Monkey King, so let's use the Monkey King instead. Maybe like you wouldn't want to tattoo that much of the butt crack, and then you have the backs of the armpits. So those are areas that I'd like to start some negatives. And then it's just trying to find really cool shapes that aren't predictable and are different than something maybe that you've done before, that gets you from A to B. And then you're like, okay, so now I have that like cool sweep that takes me from the top of the butt crack to the upper left spongy part of the armpit. And so I'm going to put my focal point, my dragon head, my claw, or whatever. I'm going to find a way to use that big, cool French curve, that negative sweep, to frame a primary element. And then that kind of helps to inform where that primary element might go. But you're doing it based on just not wanting to tattoo the crappy parts of the body,
I think Philip Liu did the same thing with some of his designs too.
I bet, yeah, no doubt. I'm sure he did. Yeah.
It's hearing stuff like that I think, at least for myself, makes me feel like a total beginner. Like Man, I have so much to go because that's such an amazing idea. But I know the thing in terms of like an education, which I really enjoy about tattooing, is it's kind of like a video game that you really enjoy, and there's just like an unlimited amount of DLC. There's so much that you can learn, and it's like so pleasurable to keep learning.
Yeah, definitely.
I have a question. I have a client that I'm still working on who has very ruddy skin. So like really a lot of red and a lot of vascular, like her skin oozes a lot more and it's just so red. And I found that all the color palette that I chose, like everything, nothing looked the way I expected it to look in the skin. And I had to keep, just trying to be creative and swapping out different colors, adding more whites to try to brighten things up. And I don't know if you have any tips for dealing with people with a very red undertone in their skin.
My answer won't necessarily be to how to answer. Sorry, my answer won't be how to work necessarily with red skin, but I want to suggest it's more about how do you morph your process, because when I'm hearing the situation that you're describing, my answer to that is just I need to take it slower, and I need to leave it really. I need to take a couple extra steps to let the body tell me what to do, as opposed to kind of like the other way around. Instead of like taking a design and shoehorning it into whatever conditions I'm working with, let those conditions inform my decisions. So if I'm doing a color piece, I would probably be starting with like the absolute lightest tones that I can, to at least assure me that I'm still going to have those light tones to kind of work upon later on. And I'm going to be using negative space as well. Man, my cats are going crazy. Sorry if any of you guys can hear that. Yeah, so I would just be doing like revision on revision. And when I'm drawing it, I might try to use desaturated colors to kind of like guess what it might look like when it's healed, if that makes any sense.
Yep, yeah, that makes sense.
One thing too with that is just being honest with your client. And the earlier you are in your tattoo career, you don't want your clients to think that you're incompetent. You want them to think you're always in control. And so you're like, I've got to figure out how to get this done. But I'm almost 30 years in, and I just had someone last week who's a plumber who has incredibly difficult forearm scan, working on his left forearm, and he's had that left forearm hanging out of the driver's side window for 40 years plumbing, and it's difficult. You can't even wipe it. The paper towel comes apart on his arm. It's so rough. And it's like you actually come across being honest with people and just saying like, your skin is a nightmare, dude. I'm doing my best here, but we're just going to have to break this up. And if you have to figure out a way to do it financially, whatever you have to do. But I used to think that people would think that I wasn't competent if I couldn't get ink in the skin. Now I just go like, hey, I know what I'm doing and I can't get ink in the skin. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have to figure this out. We're going to take a different approach than I normally would. And I've never had any pushback from that. So,
yeah, I think just like transparency and non-judgmental open communication is the best way for them to not only feel supported and feel as if like you have their best interest in mind, but you're also simultaneously educating your clients so they can better understand some of the considerations that you've made, because then they're going to be kind of able to guess ahead of time why you may have done something if you're giving them a little bit of an idea as to what your process is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It looks like Dan's iPad raised his hand too.
So yeah, if you could just like zoom in on a couple of your wave shapes. I had a question about how you sort of developed that particular style, because some people have really smooth waves, some people have really sharp, jagged waves, but yours are almost more like they have a soft shape to them, but they're very textural in a certain way. Did you use a specific painter or a specific set of painters and kind of combine them? What was your how did you come up with this particular style of wave?
I would say that my waves are very different from piece to piece. I think after some time, or at least to myself, they seem to be different enough. I think after some time, you'll undoubtedly start to solidify your own visual language, kind of consciously. But I think just like experimenting over and over and over again. So like almost trying to like work on separate sides of the spectrum if you can afford to do so, like working on you know, really, really small ones, or, you know, spending some other time working on like really, really big waves. One of the coolest little bits of advice that I've ever gotten was from an old coworker of mine. And I had done a dragon. I'll draw a little dragon here real quick. So he's like this. I had like some waves, and he's got his claws. All right, there he is with his waves. He comes by and he says, I have to be honest with you, I was a little bit disappointed with the waves in your piece. I was so curious to see what you were going to do. And I said, oh, sorry, what did you kind of have in mind? And he said, well, I was kind of excited to see, like, was he going to go with a really big wave or a really small wave? And as he kind of expanded upon it, the idea was he was wanting to see me do either, basically just crank it up to 10 was his idea. Just crank it up to 10. Either commit to a gigantic crashing wave that really pushes that movement. Or the other solution that he kind of described was actually, what if you did the opposite and you did these like tiny little waves, which are supposed to give off the impression that this is like a gigantic dragon. And that made me like realize like, holy shit, I can use water in such different ways to express different things. So that kind of started me on this path of trying to just make an attempt at different varieties. And I think naturally through time, you'll, whether it's you find it works better for your process or you're just enjoying it more, you're going to kind of, over the course of years, kind of land in your style, I suppose.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
I wanted to jump back for just a second. I know we're kind of long, and we can wrap whenever you're good with it. But you were talking about specific colors that you're using, like, you know, like Diablo for this, a dragon for this, and you remember them specifically. And I wonder, are you constantly like, I mean, obviously you wouldn't end up with dragon and Diablo if you weren't buying the big sets or just like grabbing, you know, random colors that look interesting to you. But are you keeping a log and trying to purposefully experiment with different reds or different greens or whatever? Or are you, or do you have a set palette and then you just add a color here or there to test?
Yes. So no, I'm constantly experimenting with color, and I'm always keeping track of it. So at the end of every session, I will actually take a picture of the inks that I've used, so I can track the consistency of that color over time, not only in terms of like vibrancy and healing, but also actual application. So I know when I like just to go back to this back piece, there was a color that as soon as I put it in, I was like, this is going to heal terribly. It was this area here. I was going to try to put in something like a dusty rose. I ended up using solid ink. I think it was Old Rose. And that color was just not going in. And I've since resolved kind of like the issue that I was having. But I could tell right away it was going to give me some problems. That, because I was able to track it, I knew right away, okay, maybe don't incorporate this color too much more into your palette, or I can, another really good one is orange. So I have two different pieces on my body. I have some cherry blossoms and I have a tiger. One was made using Eternal Ink bright orange, and then the other one is made using solid ink golden orange. And the tiger that I have is 8 years old now, and the cherry blossoms I have are maybe 4 years old, so double the time. And the solid ink golden orange looks way more new than my other one. Also, the police are coming. The cherry blossoms that I have peeled way lighter. They're like a peach orange, and they both have like relative similar exposure to the sun. so keeping track of your inks and just seeing like how do they heal years down the line too. Like that's the big overall project. But I think just keeping track of your inks in general, just to know what colors you want to incorporate into your permanent palette, and then kind of going from there.
Yeah. That's kind of the way that I do the same thing. I take, if I'm using something that's outside of my normal palette, I take a photo of it and put it in their Dropbox so that I can so that I can remember. Yeah. Anything else? This was fantastic. Let me just say real quickly. But go ahead, Lennon, and then I'll say what I was going to say.
I just had a real quick question. With these large pieces that you're doing, what is your process as far as pain management goes? Like, how often do you take breaks? Do you use like Bactine? Is there any kind of like prep or anything? And I don't know if you do end up doing back-to-back day sessions or anything like that. How do you prep for that as well?
So in terms of pain management, again, I just have to relate back to what my experiences of like being tattooed. Like those are going to be some of the most informative things to use. Like whether it's a good session or a bad session where you've gotten tattooed, like you will learn something from everything. So sometimes, when I got my foot tattooed, the key to sitting through that comfortably was the fact that the artist had provided like a pillow to go behind my back. So sometimes it doesn't even have to do with like how you're putting the needles. It has to do with, does your client have all of like the necessary items next to the station? Does he have that pillow support? As far as like numbing creams and Bactine, I generally don't like to introduce too many additional things into the process. I've had negative experiences with numbing cream, and that's a much longer topic in terms of like how they affect the skin, from my experience at least. But I don't like to use numbing cream. I try to take as few breaks as possible. I find that when you do take a break, that like when they immediately come back, it's a lot worse. And I found that's what it is when I get tattooed. So I'll have a good meal at the beginning, so I can kind of cut down on those sort of things. I'll try not to go to the bathroom too often, so I'll just take that into consideration. I might have like a light snack in between, but I try to keep it as consistent as possible, and I try to regulate my energy levels. To just to clarify, just to have the most like sort of consistent workflow. Pain management. What else to mention? Now, in terms of large scale projects back to back, a big thing that has helped is taking a day off in between. That makes such a difference. I've done clients like 2 days in a row and 3 days in a row. And sometimes having that 1 day off in between makes a world of difference. And I've tried it off with a few clients, and a back piece is going to be really painful. That's typically the one that I have the most complications with in terms of pain. Yet I found sometimes doing 1 day on, 1 day off, 1 day on, or 2 days in a row, 1 day off, and then a third day, it makes like what might have ended up to be like a 2 or 3 hour session into a 4 or 5 hour session, no problem.
Never thought of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was awesome. And Patrick, I really appreciate you taking the time to prepare the way that you did. I didn't, when we had the idea to start doing these technique talks, it's like, I'll pull up people's Instagram and I'll say, what about this piece? What about this piece? And that may be what we do, for the most part, but I appreciate the preparation. It's awesome.
Oh, no problem. It was my pleasure. I think especially with like a lot of the discussions that I've been seeing kind of popping up the past like week in the tattoo community, in terms of like, building like networks and communities. I think that, groups such as this, where it's just all open sharing, and it's all, a positive mood, and you're doing such a great job kind of hosting this, Jake, and directing the questions and leading us also. It made it really easy. To have some fun and talk about art with everybody.
Awesome. Thank you. Anyone in closing have any questions? Should we try to rope Patrick into coming and teaching at Paradise? All right, who's coming to Paradise? Surely everyone in this club is coming to Paradise. Sweet.
Everybody has to come to
They
Paradise.
have to come to Paradise.
Oh man,
Come on, Chrome. Don't shake your head. You're coming.
I can't.
Yeah, I mean, I would love that one day, but I think I need to get better at my public speaking skills and to not like immediately soil myself as soon as I get up on stage. But it'd be nice one day. That would be a nice career goal.
You could just come and tattoo, man. You could just, you know,
That's
get a
true.
booth
It is
come
a
and
tattoo.
tattoo.
It is a tattoo gathering. That's true.
Yeah, well, just on the note of like tattoo gatherings, has anyone here been to like the Bay Area convention?
I've not.
Oh my God, that was unbelievable to go to. This was like back in 2019, the land before COVID. It was, so my only other convention that I've gone to was like a large scale commercial convention here in Toronto, where it's more of like a passive aggressive like penis measuring competition. Whereas the Bay Area convention was, to be put just in one word, it was authentic. You walk in, there's no competitions, they don't bother with any of that stuff. There's no music playing. Like, as much as I like Rammstein, they play Rammstein every year at the convention here in Toronto. I'm not sure if it's like by chance or it's like a tradition, but I'll hear it at least once. There's always competitions, there's a lot of posturing, but the Bay Area convention is like just filled wall to wall with amazing artists. And I also maybe just want to preface like why is going to conventions like really useful is, going to a convention, and like I've been getting tattooed at conventions. It's really about like making introductions and asking, if you're going to spend time with someone, like ask them like critical questions. And those conversations I've had have been like the most useful things I've ever had in my career. They're the most useful tips I've ever had. Like, I had a fantastic conversation with one of Horiyoshi's apprentices as to like what are your expectations for like a non-Japanese person to be kind of making an attempt at making respectful Japanese inspired tattoos. And that conversation was like maybe only 30 minutes, but I walked away with huge parts of my philosophy now, and like a better sense of like what my responsibilities are as an artist. And those things are obviously way better than just the tattoo that you get on your back or whatever. It really helps, help you grow as a person, if that makes any sense.
And just to add on to that, what are some of your philosophies on tattooing Japanese and Asian inspired tattoos, not coming from that background?
That's a fantastic question. I have to preface it immediately by saying that I'm not going to be, the most qualified person to answer that question. Like, for one, I think that conversation needs to kind of be like put to the participants of like the participants at the core of that community. But that being said, too, I don't think that you can necessarily like take from the conversations I've had. It seems that they sense that that authority to say what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate. It's not determined by one person, and it's thankfully there seems to be a lot more things aren't black and white. There's a little bit more subtlety that's involved, and like I'm happy to share with what this individual recommended to me without saying their name, because I don't want to put words in a very specific person's mouth. But to summarize it, and then I can expand upon it, it's just have respect and just try your best and ask yourself in your heart, am I doing the right thing? And that'll kind of help guide you.
Thanks, Pat.
Anything else?
Anyone? Maybe we can shut it down.
I just had one quick question. I noticed that on one of Guy's posts when he was talking about how the colors healed over time, you had actually brought up a great question, because he said, I've noticed that the orange was really holding, in raw pigment. And you said, well, is that from because you've been using it for a while, or is it, I kind of want to pose that question back to you, like what colors are you finding that are really staying in the skin that when they come back in, you're like, oh, that looks exactly like I thought it was going to look. I'm not going to have to do a whole lot more with that. And if you kind of have those other colors where you're like, I know that I'm on the edge with using this color, but I really want to work it in here and I might have to rework it. So if you can just give a quick spectrum.
I think that kind of has to be divided into two separate parts. Is like seeing it healed fresh and seeing it healed like really settled in, because like those are two very different things. And that's a much larger conversation about responsibility and like even business models incorporating touch-ups into the future, which I don't have the knowledge to really speak to that so much, but just cataloging the inks that you've used and seeing how they hold up over time. Like for example, my yellows, the best yellow that I've ever used, and it's actually the one that I used on the Monkey King back piece, was Eternal Ink Jesse Yen Harvest Gold. That one's a really, really interesting one, because when you hold it next to like another yellow, it may not be the brightest yellow in terms of value, but healed, you'll miss about 0.5 of a value scale lower, but the saturation for whatever reason just is like leagues beyond any other yellow that I've used. So it's a little bit darker, but the saturation is much more vibrant. So just purely experience, just using them and cataloging them and using the same colors for like a long time. Like there's, unfortunately with tattooing, it's like time is such a big part of the equation in our experimentation. So we can't easily just, put it in, see how it dries after a day or two, and then like, oh, okay, now I know what to do. It's like using the same color for like 2 years and then coming to the conclusion of, oh yeah, that works, or like, no, that doesn't work at all. Or sometimes you have to wait 5 years to really get the answers to that.
And I think that's really the disadvantage of an artist like me that, isn't really doing those really big pieces. So sometimes we don't get the opportunity to, see it month after month or even ever again. So that's why I kind of went to you as a seasoned artist to just kind of get a feel of, what colors and things like that. So
the bad thing about that, Chrome, is that it's vital that you see tattoos down the line. So one thing that when I was doing single session pieces and not having the same, not seeing the same people regularly, one thing that I found that worked was emphasizing how important it was to me to get a healed photo of their tattoo. And I think that made them feel like their tattoo was very important to me. Like, hey, I'm very proud of this piece and I really want to see what it looks like, in 6 months or whatever. And if you could just swing by at your convenience, I'll take a break. If I'm tattooing, I'll take a break for 5 minutes and we'll get a photo. And whether or not I really cared about the tattoo or the photo or was going to put it in my portfolio or whatever, it lets me see like, mint blue or teal looks awesome when it's fresh, but in this skin tone, it turns kind of dingy and brown. And you'll start to find that, especially you'll recognize it the longer you go, you'll recognize it as the tattoo is happening, where you're like, I see that it's sitting on the skin. I see it looks kind of glowy, but something about the way that it shimmers makes me think that I should see it again later. You'll start to like connect those little dots even whenever the tattoo is fresh. You'll be like, I'm not sure about this. Like she's olivey and I'm trying to use a bright red and I'm afraid that they're going to cancel each other out. You know what I mean? Or whatever it is, you start to just kind of see that stuff. And so it's almost like kind of tricking your client into coming back in and be like, oh, I'd love to see this thing when it's healed. Anytime you can swing by. I'm here Monday through whatever, Tuesday through Saturday.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic idea. Jake, I appreciate that. That's better than tattooing my entire family, which is basically what I'm trying to do right now.
Oh yeah, that's way worse.
Well, hey, when you're at your family reunion, you can do like all the back pieces. I might just add one thing to color that's really, really, really interesting. And Jake, I'm so curious to know what your thoughts are on this. So another reason why it's interesting to keep track of how colors heal over time, and I agree, like asking your clients to send photos is going to be crucial, is going to be understanding like how does the human body react to ink over time. It sounds like such a simple thing to say, but really doing it as much as possible to see like all of the variety of possibilities of what can happen with tattoos. So I'll bring to mind one of the scarier moments of my career that thankfully was resolved by the end. And I want to know what Jake's Jake, I'm curious what your suspicions are as to what caused this. So I've had 2 or 3 clients where I've been doing light colors in. This is maybe like 8 years ago, or no, 7 years ago. Light colors, so like light pinks, yellows, and I'll pack it in and it'll heal well. And when I see them for the next session, it'll look great. It'll be really vibrant. But then about 3 to 4 months after it's applied, brown spots show up in it. And the first time I ever saw this, I was like, what the, like, pardon my language, what the fuck is happening? Like, I did not at all attention, like, because it's, you know, a big spot of brown in the middle of yellow, I was freaking out. So I remember a similar situation happening to an artist that tattooed me. So I messaged Sergey and I said, Sergey, I've been having this problem, and I remember this happened to you too. What was your solution to this? And he said, it'll go away, but I'm going to ask my friend who will be able to better answer this. His friend happened to be Nico Hurtado. So Nico, I guess they were just hanging out in, I think maybe it's like Los Angeles that day. And Nico's suggestion, as I remember it, but maybe we need to go back to Nico to see what he thinks, is he was suggesting that clients that are typically from around the equator, and I don't know if he's, maybe it's just like darker pigmented skin is what he's referring to, but people that are around the equator, their skin tends to react to some of the white that's in the ink, which will cause, he was suggesting, if I remember correctly, and I hope I'm not getting this wrong, it was like the body was sending extra melanin to that area for whatever reason as a response. And then over the course of 2 to 3 years, it would go away. And that was, to me at the time, that was not a satisfactory answer, because like how, like, I don't know really what I'm talking about when I'm parroting this information to my client, but I had to. So I told Julian, I was like, well, I mean, I was told it's gonna go away in 2 to 3 years. And then I happened to, have another client where this happened to, is a really nice Quetzalcoatl sleeve that I did, like the Mexican deity. And sure enough, all around her shoulder and on her ditch, giant brown spots showed up, like well after the tattoo has been healed. And I was, again, freaking out because I put so much attention into saturating that really properly. But here are these giant brown marks in the teals and the yellows and the pinks, I remember specifically. Years later, I'm tattooing her husband. And so I get to see Karen for the first time in years, and I look at her arm, they're gone. And like, it looked like better than ever. And I was like, oh my God, like it actually worked. Like all those brown spots completely went away. So my question that I want to leave open to the floor is, has anyone had this happen to them, or has anybody heard as like maybe what's going on of what I'm referring to?
I know exactly what you're talking about, but I've never had the giant brown spots. I've had it almost like freckles that appear out of nowhere. And I've had it happen with teals, with blues, like lighter blues. But I think any color that has a lot of white mixed into it, I think it could happen with lime greens or any color that has yellows, that has a lot of white. I have no idea why it happens. And I didn't even realize, I can, as you're talking, I can picture one specific client, a sleeve that I did years ago on a woman that these freckles just kind of came out of nowhere, these brown spots through the teal, and it looks very dingy, almost like she's like has dirt on her skin, like it needs to be washed off. And I haven't seen her in a while, but I know it was prevalent enough that it stood out to me. I did another sleeve on her, and it stood out to me the whole second sleeve. So I'd be curious now. I should message her and ask her to send me a photo of it and see if it went away. I don't know why it would go away. I don't know.
So I'm Latina persuasion as well, and I noticed that I did like a cool mint on my leg, and I had the exact same issue happen, like just dark spots coming through it. And I was also on that black and gray roundtable a couple weeks ago, and kind of alluded to that, that with the opaque grays. And they were just saying it was the sun exposure that they really try to stay away from, all of those colors, especially with people who tend to be in the sun or tan very prevalently like I do. I mean, I really can change color with very little sun exposure. So I think that it might have something to do with that. And that's kind of what Nico was saying, like, as far as closer to the equator, different melanin in the skin, I guess.
My only I don't even want to say the only pushback to that, but the only and thank you for sharing that, because it's more information to help us all figure out what the hell that is. But the only reason why I'm doubtful if that's the particular issue was this woman. She's not currently living anywhere near the equator, getting much sun. She lives in Seattle and works from home and confesses to be indoors most of the time.
Yeah, I don't know, but for someone like Nico, that's something that he has to pay really close attention to, and that's the luxury that we have as illustrative tattooers, or people who can we can get away with that. But Nico's using a lot of subtle peach, ochre, soft transitions. Like if he's trying to highlight a cheek and it's a strong light source, that thing has to be consistent, and if it's not, it really screws his tattoos up. So I'm sure he's done some deep dives into it.
Okay.
But I don't know. I'm not saying that he's right, but I can say that, that's a bigger deal in realism than it is in illustrative tattooing.
Yes, I have to say we do get it a little bit easier sometimes. We're dealing with different problems, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to start applying pressure for questions. So we're going to go one by one, and we're going to see what you guys are thinking. Anthony, what is on your mind?
Okay, I've got. Am I muted? No. Sort of an easy answer and a more elaborate answer. I guess it could also be simple, but in the Reaper piece, you were talking about a light yellow and a darker, more neutral yellow. The neutral looked like solids anonymous, but that light yellow, it looked very light. Was that just a basic yellow, or was there white in there?
That is solid ink Jupiter.
Jupiter.
Yeah, that's solid ink Jupiter. I very specifically remember the exact color palette for that piece. Solid ink Jupiter, Eternal ink Jupiter, solid ink mustard, and solid ink anonymous were the three that I used.
Cool. And with something like a sleeve, how specific do you get when body mapping?
Yes. Great question. So typically like the biggest problem that we kind of have with any sort of sleeve is what happens when both ends of our design overlap. And so typically with my process, those are the areas that I'm going to keep the loosest, and I'm not going to bother putting any essential parts of the composition in there. I'm going to leave those areas a little bit more flexible. I let the body do a lot of the talking for me. So I prepare my drawing to about 70%, and then I let the body do 30% of the decision making for me. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you. All right, Daniel, what are you thinking?
I don't actually have any particular questions. If something comes up, I will raise my hand though. So yeah, thank you for just doing an extra long Q&A. This is really great.
No, it's my pleasure. Allison, what about yourself?
I was really enjoying the browns that you had in the inner arm on that same piece, and I was wondering which browns do you like to use the most, and which did you?
That's probably solid ink brown and dulce de leche solid ink as well.
I love that dulce de leche. I use the hell out of that. So
yeah, when you find a color that you like, you're like, yes.
Yes.
Team.
Yeah, I need to get some new browns. I'm struggling with mine, and I don't like any of them. Well, I like one of them, but most of them I don't like. So
All right, color application thing that I learned. Why colors that you think don't work, you can sometimes make them work. So when I was using that old rose, I spoke to my coworker, AK, who, this guy is like the shop expert when it comes to technique. And just for context, he has a bodysuit by Shige. And the only other artist he has is like Horiyoshi III on his body. So he's been exposed to some talent, at least. He was explaining to me that like there should be a consideration in voltage depending on like the viscosity of the ink. And so how he had explained it at the time was thicker inks slow down your voltage, more fluid inks, thinner inks heighten your voltage. So as I was working, in the following sessions for that same piece, I would try that out. I would lower my voltage to like maybe 7, when I'm packing these like really thick colors, and then I would maybe like heighten my voltage later on. But there's a thing with voltage where, voltage is, going to be determined by your hand speed plus the machine that you're using, in my experience, at least. So after a while, you're like, especially if you're using the same machine for a long time, you're really tied into what that vibration feels like. The vibration that you get from the machine is going to do so much of it's going to be giving you so much of the information as to what's going on underneath the skin, which is why you can tell if a color is packed in. Like you can pack in a color with your eyes closed and the vibration will tell you if it's in or not, or black for that matter, right? So how I kind of pushed off of AK's technique was, rather than changing my voltage, I would change the viscosity of the ink. And I'm not talking about doing like really complicated things. It's that I would use, if I found I was having a little bit of problems putting the ink in, I would really load up that mag with color, and then I would dip it once in my rinse cup. And it's not enough water to affect the saturation, but it's just enough water for it to like slide in way faster. That way I don't have to adjust my voltage, and that way I don't have to like readjust my, like the way that I'm thinking about, like I was going to call it haptic feedback because I just got a PlayStation 5. Sensory feedback. You don't have to overthink it too much. And I found as soon as I started doing that, my range of possible colors that I felt comfortable with doubled or tripled in size. So I'm not saying that's going to be the solution to your particular issue, but you may find that to be like a worthwhile experiment in seeing that, like, oh, maybe this brown just needs like a slight adjustment for it to go in easier. I hope that answers your question.
And can I add to that real quick?
Yes, please.
I've seen some people, what they'll intentionally do when they're setting up their colors, and I've done this on a few occasions. They're more stubborn colors. They'll add just a drop of Keep It Wet, or whatever wettening solution you use by whatever brand, but they'll just add a drop into each one of them to where it kind of like, it makes it to where the flow is a little bit better. I'm curious if that was, it sounds to me in rationalization like kind of the same situation with just doing the dip in the water too. So
yeah, that's very fair. I mean, like, that's a product I can try out. That's a very fair point. I don't have experience using any of those, so I won't have much to add to it. Unfortunately, I won't be able to offer my own experience, but it's something worth considering in the future, because you're right. At the end of the day, if it's just changing the viscosity, but I'm also suspecting that stuff, with the name Keep It Wet, it's also just going to be, retaining the moisture of the piece a little bit more. I don't really know much about those sort of products. I'd have to do like some more research before I would really know what I'm diving myself into.
Yeah, I also want to ask one question while we're on the subject of the machine and all that stuff. What size stroke machine do you use for your color saturation?
I believe so. I'm using a wired Solnova 3.5. I've been using that for the past few years for literally everything. I don't have a different machine for lining. I don't have a different machine for packing. I don't have a different machine for shading. It's all the same thing. And I understand that, again, I could be a little bit more, I could embrace other solutions. I could embrace other machines, perhaps. It might help my efficiency if I do so. But for the time being, though, I'm trying to limit the amount of factors that I'm kind of having to play with. So just to simplify it in my mind, I've taken one part of that equation out. I'm just using one machine, and I let the skin do all the talking, and I get really familiar with how that machine works. In terms of stroke, I just found that, like, when I was using, I think it was like the 2.0 stroke on their wireless pen, I got to try that out for one day, and it wasn't nearly strong enough. I remember the machine that I disliked the most in my whole career was a Bishop Phantom. It felt like it was so soft. It felt like a cherub was like poking my client with like a pool cue. That's how soft it was hitting them. Whereas I don't want something that's like a jackhammer. I want something that's like right in the middle. It's like a firm masseuse. A masseuse with authority is what I'm looking for.
Nice.
Yeah.
I have a Solnova as well, but I was finding that the grip on it was too big for my hand, and I changed to one of those Unio pens that Cheyenne came out with, and I love that one. I find it much more efficient. I can work faster with it, and it's got a adjustable stroke length, which I enjoy that aspect as well.
Yeah, I might say, like, I'm resistant to give any. I'm always a little bit hesitant to give like information about like needles or machines, because at the end of the day, like, none of that stuff really matters. It's all about what works best for you, and so no matter what machine your hero uses, it might not at all work for you. And if you find the right machine for you, or you find the right settings or colors for you, you might far supersede whoever you're looking to surpass their work. Now, one individual, your name is Chrome's iPad. Now, is that referring to, is that your name, or is it Google Chrome?
Oh no, Chrome is my artist name.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. Go ahead.
Well, I have a two-part question. The first one was, is that the brown that your wife said is most complimentary to her, and that's her color, the brown shirt that you're wearing?
Well, this guy right here, this would be like a dark ochre. I think it's also just because of the lighting, it looks maybe a little bit darker than it should. But no, that conversation was more just in terms of like what works for her specific body. And that's also going to be a combination with, like, you know, the color of someone's hair. At the end of the day, it's just shapes and values and hues, right? So it's not too dissimilar as to, you know, planning out a tattoo or planning out like the frame for a photograph in terms of where you put things.
So my other question was, why do you require your clients to be over 21 to tattoo them?
Oh, I think I might change that, to be honest with you. I you know, as you mentioned that, I don't even remember saying that. I think I find that there's a different level of maturity, I suppose, that in working with particular clients. That's not, you know, I don't want to be too stubborn about it. So I very well might take that away, because I mean, I've met some clients that are 18 or 19 that are, to be quite frankly, like, they seem way more mature than me. So, like, who am I to turn them away, right? But I would say, like, on average, I prefer clientele that's typically like a open-minded, patient, and they typically, I found that they're thinking a little bit more critically about, like, the narrative of their piece. And I'm not saying that's, objectively speaking, the best client, but typically that's the personality trait that I like to work with. Those are the sets of personality traits that I like to work with. And I found from my experience from that to come from, like, a more mature crowd, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I was curious about that. And then also, what is it, because I noticed you also prefer not to do neck tattoos. And I kind of am in that realm where I'm thinking about going in that same direction. And I was just curious, like, why you chose to just put that hard line in there.
For myself, you know, as Jake's mentioned before, it's about knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are, and those things are going to change through the course of your career. And it's also about, like, you know, like we all have a level of anxiety, certainly, all of us. And I don't want to suggest that like my level of anxiety while I'm tattooing is any worse than anybody else's, but I know that just for myself, I need to create a system in which I can work with my anxiety and I can kind of put limits to or boundaries as to what I'm comfortable doing. Because at the end of the day, I have to be comfortable in order to do my best work. And I've found that, I've had experiences where I just say yes to projects because I've been a people pleaser, far too often in situations where I shouldn't have been. And I open myself up to like very anxious situations, whether that be, maybe a weird placement but for me, it's that particular area of the body. I'd like to get to it one day. But its particular set of challenges are not something that I don't think that like I would gain a tremendous amount from opening myself up to that particular type of stress or those particular types of challenges when I already have a pretty good idea as to like what I want to be working on as I'm going through like the year, I suppose. So to answer your question, I do it in order to manage the amount of anxiety that I expose myself to, because if I can remain calm and collected and confident throughout my tattooing, I can deliver my best work. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, now Philip, you have quite a few people with you there, I see. So I want to open up to any guys.
I'll start first. I know for my tattoo, when I reached out, you sent me back the documentary by Jeff Gogwe, Surrender. And I know that's something you do with each of your clients. What if the client is still being difficult? What's your kind of advice in kind of coercing them into trusting the process?
Well, at the end of the day, I don't want to force them to trust the process either. So there becomes a point where like there's a pretty big split after that point. I found that the documentary completely changes them. Like I would say 95% of my clients after watching that documentary and after our consultation are super, super easygoing. The 5% that remain, at the end of the day, like that's their body and that's their project that they're kind of considering. So if I find that maybe it's something that I can't deliver, then I have to, give them some recommendations. I'd rather disappoint someone just by saying that than rather do a piece that I know isn't going to turn out the best and disappoint them with a permanent, or give them a permanent disappointment. But on the other hand, though, I would say like the other thing is they have to be making their decisions with this tattoo. So sometimes I just do what they want, even if I don't think it's the best idea, because not every piece you're gonna have that full flexibility with, but that doesn't mean it's not a valuable experience. You can still learn a lot from a piece where you don't have total control over something. So I try not to get too fussed up about it, I suppose, would be the answer to
that. No? Okay, well, my next question or last question then is, when do you plan to come back to Vancouver?
Oh my God. That's a great question. Hopefully in the summer. My wife likes the city way too much, and we're not gigantic fans of, or at least she's not a gigantic fan of Toronto, and even myself, I find it calling out to me. So maybe August, but we'll see. Okay. There's too much for me to give you an exact answer. Now Daniel, about yourself.
So I had kind of a technical question, but it's more about your setup. Whenever you're choosing, you know what, do you have a more simplified set of needles, like, or do you have like a wide array, like you have a 3, a 5, a 7 liner, and then you also pull out like whatever, an assortment of mags to fit different situations? Or do you just like, you always use a 3 liner, you always use this mag, or you see what I'm saying? Like, do you have like a really simplified setup as far as needles go, or do you just pull everything out and see what fits to the situation?
I like to keep my setup pretty simple because I want to eliminate potential complications. Now, really early during my apprenticeship, my idea of like what learning proficiency was and like learning my materials was to try as many different things as possible. So I was trying 3 tights. I was trying 3 tight, like super tights. I was trying 5 RLT. I'd try every variety you can imagine at the beginning, and the kind of the can of worms that kind of opened was it was giving me way too many factors to have to think about. And so like if I wasn't getting a good line, I would tell myself, oh, it's because I'm using this needle. And if I was using the consistent needle at the same time, that's one possibility that's taken out. So that must mean it's the stretch, or it must be like the skin. There's by eliminating the variety, I was able to like focus on perhaps what was more important. My setup for needles that I'm using now is very consistent. It's like a 3, a 5. I'll occasionally use like a 5-round shader, but that's pretty rare. And then I jump immediately to 9. So I try to exaggerate line weight contrast, because I'm just trying to use as many different types of contrast simultaneously. So I'll go like sometimes 3-round liner, 9-round shader, nothing in between. And then as far as mags, I'll actually, at the end of a piece, I will most often line a piece with a mag. I will reline with like a 7 to 9 curved mag, and I will just push that along until it's like a really, really, really thick black line, especially for large pieces.
Shader.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem. But maybe just to finish with the other ones were was 7 mag, 15 mag, 23 mag, and that's it. I don't want any complications to my process than that.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Can anybody else think of anything?
Yeah, this was great. I really appreciate it. That was.
Do you thumbnail, like when you're first putting your design together? Like, do you do thumbnails?
Yeah, I'll do thumbnails. As Michael J. Kelly recently said something really great. He said, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but he said, spend 15 minutes every day drawing, not because you're trying to get the good one, but because you're trying to get the bad ones out of the way. I love that expression. I love that expression. Get the bad ones out of the way. And it's true. Your first couple compositions, you're like, oh yeah, this is great. And then within minutes, you'll think it's bad. You got the bad ones out of the way. You got the information that you need that will help you kind of get to the proper composition, as it were. And if I'm not sure, Jake, if you have any more time, I was looking to share perhaps a story about why extracurricular activities are equally important to your craft. But do you have time, Jake?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Totally.
Okay. I just thought of mentioning something because it happened to come up today with my wife and I, which was how I'm like, I'll put it succinctly. I go on walks with my wife throughout the neighborhood, and we take pictures of leaves and flowers. So why is that such a part of my process? Starting about last fall, we would go on some walks with our dog, and I was starting to notice like some changes in the foliage, but also I was realizing like, hey, there's a lot more like Japanese maple trees around here than I thought. And this is a big subject that I'm tattooing all the time. So, here's the reference. Go look at the actual reference. It's right in front of you. So I would look at it and I would study it. And then as I walk through the neighborhood, I would start to see like different variations of Japanese maples. And before I knew it, I was just kind of like comparing them in terms of shape design. And then I was like, oh my God, these are like little shape experiments. So then as I would walk down the street even more, I would see like a ginkgo tree. And I would not only look at like the individual petals, but I would also look at how like the actual structure of the branch works, and trying to see like how is that energy being dispersed throughout it. And it's giving me, ideas for compositions, and it's kind of like strengthening some of like I suppose you can even say like my biases towards composition or towards shape design. And it's exposing me to perhaps color palettes I wouldn't have imagined. So that form of studying has been incredibly useful to me because I think studying really basic shapes goes a really, really, really long way in terms of like then trying to figure out more complicated shapes. And just today, like we just happened to have like our SLR with us, and we were taking like, you know, proper photos, like or trying to take proper photos. And when you're working with, you know, simple leaves and simple flowers, and you're trying to frame them in an appealing way, you're essentially just reducing them to shapes. So you're having to like frame shapes, and we're talking about shapes as simple as like a collection of triangles, and how can I change my angle so that maybe I'm putting those dark red triangles of a Japanese maple up against a light blue sky, and I can kind of try to work with shape contrast or hue contrast or value contrast. Or I can, you know, aim my camera downwards and I can compare those bright red or crimson triangles to like the green foliage behind it. And I can, then I have to adjust my aperture. I have to adjust my aperture, which then makes me more sensitive to light contrast. And so for me, it's a really, really great exercise in just working with like the basis of two-dimensional visual design, which is just shapes at the end of the day. And, you know, you don't have to do that. Maybe for you guys, it's going to be, I don't know, there's so many sort of like extracurricular things you could do to try to work with shape design. You could pause old Akira Kurosawa films, which is like something that I've done, or like look at black and white movies and see how did these guys frame the subjects in order to make the shots really good, because we have to remember that they didn't have the advantage of using hue as a method of establishing contrast. They only had like a spectrum in which to work with, and so that hue or that saturation contrast is like completely tossed out. What are you left with? You're left with shape contrast, you're left with value contrast, you're left with edge contrast, you're left with texture contrast. And seeing how those, you know, whether it's like Orson Welles or Akira Kurosawa, seeing how do they work with their values and how do they work with their shapes, and how much of that picture do they want to spend on value contrast versus shape contrast. And opening yourself up to things other than just tattoos is, I've found it to be crucial in my development over the past few years, because tattooing is one of many mediums. And so why limit yourself to just one specific like source of information? There's so much out there. Like nowadays I'm watching like Japanese craft videos on like kimono resist dye methods. You can look at pottery, flower arranging. There's so much out there that you can look at that can then inform, you know, your visual acuity, and it will better inform your ability to make decisions that sometimes you would have even never would have thought of otherwise. That was the conclusion to that story that I thought to mention.
Yeah. Staying curious.
Staying curious and have fun, because there's this sumo wrestler that I was listening to, and he said, you know what, man, I only have one chance at being a sumo wrestler. I only have one career. And I thought about that. I was like, man, I only get to be a tattoo artist once in my life. You know, there's going to be a day where, you know, maybe I won't be able to attract the same clientele, or maybe my wrist is going to go out, or maybe I'll get sick, or maybe I have to, you know, take care of a family member for like, you know, 5 years, you know, heaven forbid. But circumstances can change, and I only have a finite amount of time to basically live the dream, because ultimately I think that tattooing is what I thought. You know, when you go to art school and they tell you, man, your art's going to change the world, and you're sitting there and you believe it. You believe like, man, my art's going to change the world and it's going to be so much fun. And then you find out that it's not really that easy. It's not really that fun sometimes. It's not really that honest, perhaps, as you thought it was. But tattooing is that, where I have like a bias, or perhaps I'm ignorant here, but I really think that we're living the dream that like all the Renaissance artists those guys kind of touch that lifestyle, right? Like we get to really critically engage about art, and we're encouraged financially to think more critically about art. And like that's such a privilege, and because it's such a privilege for such a limited amount of time, make the most of it. Have fun. Like you're not going to get a chance to look at leaves forever, right? You're not going to get a chance to have an excuse to study a leaf and then get paid for studying that leaf, down the road. So open yourself up, stay curious, and just remember to like follow your heart and follow your interests. And then if you do that, I think the rest of the stuff will come to you, because you just are going to have such a bright and vibrant energy that people are going to, be interested in, at the very least, working with you, or, at the best, hopefully, exchanging experiences and perspectives. And this is cheesy, but energies. So those are my thoughts.
Hey, what do you think? Great episode, right? I knew you'd like it. Thanks again to Patrick for taking the time. Thanks to the Inside Fireside Tattoo Club for getting so involved and being such great people and good ambassadors of tattooing. I'm really proud of the club. I'm proud of everyone in it. And we would all love if you jumped in and joined us, contribute some of the things that maybe learn a few things from us. It's a great group of people. I think you'll like it. And there's no obligation, so you could always try it out. And if it's not for you, no harm, no foul. Hey, thanks again to Tattoo Trunk. Thank you for supporting what we do, and I'll see you next time.